40 years had passed since Margaret last stepped foot in the attic of her old family home. Life had moved on in a blur of memories, of joy and heartbreak, of love and loss. Now, in her late 60s, with her children grown and gone, she found herself alone in the house that had been her sanctuary for decades. On a chilly autumn afternoon, as the wind whispered through the trees, Margaret decided to confront the past. It wasn't that she wanted to, but there was something pulling her towards that dusty, forgotten part of the house. She climbed the creaky stairs slowly, her breath heavy with the weight of old emotions. The attic door was stiff, but with a little force it gave way, revealing a dark, musty space filled with relics from a life long lived. Boxes of old photographs, letters yellowed with time, and furniture covered in thick layers of dust. Margaret flicked on the light, its dim glow casting eerie shadows across the room. She sighed, feeling the sting of nostalgia. As she began to sift through the forgotten remnants of her past, she stumbled upon an old wooden chest, one she hadn't seen in years. Its lock was rusted, and the wood looked worn, but it seemed out of place among the rest of the clutter. Something about it called to her. Her hands trembled as she forced the chest open. Inside, amidst tattered blankets and worn-out toys, she noticed something peculiar. A brittle piece of parchment, rolled up and tied with a faded red ribbon, lay buried at the bottom. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen this before, had she? With trembling hands, Margaret untied the ribbon and carefully unrolled the fragile paper. Her eyes widened as she realized what she was looking at. A map. But it wasn't just any map. It was old, far older than anything she had ever seen. The paper was covered in strange markings, symbols she didn't understand, and faded ink that had stood the test of time. There, at the center, was an X, bold and unmistakable. Margaret's mind raced, memories of her father flooding back. He had always been a man of mystery, often leaving home for long trips without much explanation. He'd told stories of distant lands and hidden treasures, but Margaret had always dismissed them as the tall tales of a dreamer. Could this be connected to him? Was it possible that he had left this behind for her to find? Suddenly, the air in the attic felt thick with tension. The house creaked, as if it too was coming alive with secrets long buried. Margaret's heart pounded in her chest as she studied the map, her mind racing with questions. Where did it lead? What was hidden at the X? The more she stared at it, the more she felt a deep sense of unease. What had her father been involved in? And why had this map been hidden for so long? As dusk settled outside, casting long shadows through the attic windows, Margaret made a decision. She couldn't ignore this discovery. Something inside her told her that this map was the key to unlocking a mystery that had haunted her family for years. And she knew she had to follow it, no matter where it led. But little did she know what lay at the end of this journey was far more dangerous and shocking than she could ever imagine. Margaret couldn't sleep that night. The image of the ancient map burned into her mind, haunting her with possibilities she had never considered. What could her father have been hiding all these years, and why had he never spoken of it? The next morning, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at the map once again, as the morning sunlight filtered through the window. Her hands traced the lines, trying to decipher the meaning behind the cryptic symbols. She felt a sense of urgency now, as if time was slipping away, and this was her last chance to unlock the secret that had been buried for decades. After a long search online, Margaret found nothing useful about the symbols. Frustrated, she turned to an old family friend, Henry, a retired professor of history and archaeology. He had known her father well and might hold the key to understanding this mystery. Without hesitation, Margaret called him and arranged to meet. Later that afternoon, Margaret arrived at Henry's house. It was a modest home, filled with books and artifacts from his travels. As she sat down in his cluttered study, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he could help her make sense of the map, and maybe, just maybe, they could discover what her father had hidden. Henry, a man in his 70s with kind, wise eyes, examined the map closely. His expression grew serious, and he leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. "This is no ordinary map, Margaret," he finally said, his voice laced with intrigue. "These markings, they're ancient, far older than anything your father could have encountered in his time. But this X, it points to something specific. Have you ever heard your father talk about hidden treasure, lost artifacts, or secret expeditions?" Margaret shook her head, her heart pounding. "No, but he did travel a lot when I was a child. He always said his work was dangerous. I just thought he was exaggerating." Henry smiled faintly. "I don't think he was exaggerating at all. This map could lead to something remarkable, but it could also be dangerous. Are you sure you want to follow this path?" Margaret paused, her mind racing. Could she really turn back now? Could she live with herself if she didn't uncover the truth? "I have to know, Henry," she whispered, her voice steady but filled with determination. "I have to know what my father was hiding." Henry nodded, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the map once more. "Then we'll start by going to the place this map points to." With Henry's guidance, Margaret learned that the map indicated a remote location in the mountains, far from any town or city. It was a place her father had visited many times during his travels, but had never spoken about. The journey there would be long and treacherous, but Margaret felt an inexplicable pull, an almost magnetic force urging her to follow. The next day, Margaret and Henry prepared for their journey. The map had awakened something inside her, something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of adventure, of purpose. But there was also a deep, unsettling feeling in the pit of her stomach. This wasn't going to be easy, and something told her it wasn't going to be safe either. As they packed their supplies into the car and set off toward the mountains, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every passing car, every shadow seemed to carry a hidden threat. The road stretched out before them, winding and desolate, and with each mile they traveled, the weight of the mystery grew heavier. By the time they reached the base of the mountains, the sun had begun to set, casting an eerie orange glow across the landscape. The air was thin and cold, and the silence was unnerving. Margaret clutched the map in her hands as they ventured deeper into the wilderness, following the trail that would lead them to the X. But as night fell, an overwhelming sense of dread crept over her. She didn't know what awaited them in the mountains, but one thing was certain: this journey was only beginning, and the answers she sought would come at a price. The night air was cold and crisp as Margaret and Henry began their hike up the rugged mountain trail. Armed with flashlights and determination, they followed the map's cryptic instructions, moving deeper into the wilderness. The path was steep and treacherous, with only the sound of their footsteps breaking the eerie silence. Hours passed, and the exhaustion weighed heavily on Margaret. Her legs ached, but the drive to uncover the truth kept her moving. Finally, just as her strength was fading, they reached a clearing. In the center stood a weathered stone structure, an ancient ruin hidden from the world. It was overgrown with vines, the stones cracked and worn by time. But there, on the largest stone, was the symbol from the map. They had found the place. With trembling hands, Margaret approached the stone. There was a small indentation, just like on the map. She hesitated for a moment, the weight of decades of mystery pressing down on her. Then, with a deep breath, she placed her hand on the indentation. A rumble echoed through the clearing. The The ground beneath them shook as the stone shifted, revealing a hidden passage leading underground. Margaret's heart raced. This was it, the secret her father had taken to his grave. Henry, standing beside her, gave her a reassuring nod, and together they ventured into the dark passage. The air inside was musty, filled with the smell of damp earth and ancient stone. Their flashlights flickered against the walls, illuminating strange symbols and carvings. At the end of the passage, they found a small chamber. In the center was a chest, ornate yet old, covered in dust but clearly untouched for decades. Margaret's hands shook as she knelt beside it. She looked at Henry, who nodded for her to open it. Slowly, she lifted the lid. Inside, she found a collection of letters, photographs and journals, pieces of her father's life she had never known existed. There were documents detailing secret expeditions, hidden discoveries, and treasure. Not gold or jewels, but ancient artifacts, relics of civilizations long gone that he had hidden to protect them from falling into the wrong hands. Among the papers was a letter addressed to her. With tears welling up in her eyes, Margaret opened the letter and began to read. It was from her father, written just before he had passed. In the letter, he explained that he had always wanted to tell her the truth, but had feared for her safety. The map, the journey, all of it had been his way of protecting her legacy and their family's history. He entrusted her with the knowledge of his discoveries and the responsibility of guarding the treasures he had hidden away. Margaret's heart swelled with emotions, sorrow, love, and pride. Her father's life had been so much more than she had ever imagined, and now she carried his legacy forward. She folded the letter carefully, holding it close to her chest. It wasn't just the treasure that mattered. It was the connection to her father, the truth she had finally uncovered after all these years. As Margaret and Henry made their way back up the passage, the weight of the mystery lifted. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The answers had been found, and the journey had come to an end, but her life and her father's legacy had just begun anew. And so, Margaret found more than just a hidden treasure. She found the truth about her father, and a piece of herself that had been lost for so long. Sometimes, the real treasure lies in the stories we uncover and the love we rediscover. If you've enjoyed this journey, please don't forget to like and subscribe to Stories of Hope. We bring you powerful, emotional tales of resilience, discovery, and transformation. Stay tuned for more incredible stories that will touch your heart and inspire your soul. Subscribe now and join us for the next journey.